let's talk about Al-Qadim Land of Fate campaign by Jeff Grubb, recommended for use with the Arabian Adventures rulebook, which I've reviewed on the channel. This is the setting box set that goes with that. They are really meant to go together. In basically any other setting, they would have gone together. I think this, and in fact, I think by 1992, when this comes out, Dark Sun has come out as a combined box set, as has Forgotten Realms, albeit that has far fewer kind of rules changes. Spelljammer was a single box set, but was thin on setting information. That is also a Jeff Grubb setting. So anyway, Strange Division. I like Al-Qadim. I like the rulebook, Arabian Adventures. I like the setting. This is the main setting box, and basically I don't think it's great. I think there are better Al-Qadim products, and I think it probably to me shows the limitations of Jeff Grubb as I find him a very reliable rules designer. I think Spelljammer has good rules. I think Al-Qadim, Arabian Adventures has good rules. I think he obviously was a major contributor to why the first edition Forgotten Realms box set and city system, which I'll probably review maybe next month, why they were good. I think he's a major contributor to that. But this highlights something that there are different skills, and a thing that Grubb doesn't do as well is give you a gameable setting. And there are other better products to kind of see the same thing. Inside, you get an Adventurer's Guide to Sakara, the setting, Fortunes and Fates for the Dungeon Master only. You get 12 cardstock sheets, maps and related. You get 10, I feel like, maybe. 8 or 10 monstrous compendium sheets, special Land of Fate ones. Not actually marked as MC sheets, actually, for once, but they are MC sheets. You get, as with the FR box set, you get this big hex, little hex map reading tool. You get a big map of Al-Qadim Land of Fate, Zakara, you can see there, and you also get two more detailed maps of the heartlands of the region, which I'm trying to remember. I think they say that's one of them that has the most important cities on it. It has Suk Bay, the big cities, Hazuz, Hial. Hazuz has its own box set about it, actually, as well. So there's the other one. That's further south. I'm trying to remember whether these maps go at the same scale. Basically, you can, to a degree, put together all the maps. 1 inch equals 30 miles, I think so. You can, there's a lot of, I think, 1 inch to 30 mile maps across the various box sets. So you can get a largely smaller scale, higher scale, bigger scale map of a lot of the Land of Fate. I will have shown one of those if it is the same scale in my Golden Voyages review. So that's nice. The maps are nice and clear. You need to use a key from your rule book, but whatever. The actual maps are very usable. So there's plenty of content here. It's over 200 pages because you have 128 and 64 respectively between the two main books, and then you have 24 sides of paper with the cardstock and whatever it is, 16 or something like that with the monstrous compendium or compendia sheets. So there's lots of content, and some of it really is quite good and useful, and some of it is not super useful. So what's in the main book, the Adventurer's Guide? There's a very short geographical section, intro geographical section, life in town and life in the desert, the two types of mock Arabian peoples who live here. Then information about desert tribes, then information about gods and faiths, and then 5 chapters on the cities, the major urban locations. This is a game which a setting in some way pushes you towards the city. There's a real tension here though, and I'll touch on this, I guess it comes up in the DM's guide for me, but It's not clear what game you're meant to be playing outside of what the adventures show you. Golden Voyages, I think, shows one way, which is, hey, you just go to a bunch of weird places and have Sinbad-like adventures, and it's all a bit, slightly abstracted cinematic fun. But other parts of the product, and that's by David Cook, Zeb Cook, other parts of the line, Steve Kurtz has his own flavour. Jeff Grubb seems to have his own vision of what's meant to happen, and it doesn't really gel. There's then some appendices in this one, and including the biggest of which is a lengthy set of Arabian Nights type tales of the Land of Fate. Fortunes and Fates, it has stuff about high-level characters, like a whole alternative high-level character domain follower system or set up. Short section about the lore, power groups. So if you want to be part of like a Mamluk Brotherhood or a Holy Slayer Fellowship. Then secrets of each city, and then magical item tables, a couple of these sections, as well as the monstrous compendium, etc., and the card stock is great. Some is not so great, and more or less you can divide it into where you're being given pure inverted commas setting info, even if it has some hooks and or useful stats. You will tend to find that is 75% not very good. And that is a lot of the material here is setting info. If you turn to the kind of directly gameable stuff, i.e. maps, magic items, and I guess stats, particular statistical options, you tend to find it's just much better. So I would say the Life in Town and Life in the Desert sections, which constitute 24 pages, are virtually worthless. There's kind of stuff about, here's the different cultural traditions of these different groups. This is how we've translated some of the Arabian milieu from legend and from historical Arabia and from Islamic tradition into the setting. And basically it's 24 pages of stuff you're not going to use. There's touches of it you'll use, but I think virtually no table will find it helpful. It is there for the DM to read most generously. And really, it's there for the DM to read as a novel, as a kind of piece of fiction writing. And Grubb co-wrote perfectly good novels. I've reviewed them with Kate Novak, his wife, who I think was or is first and foremost a novelist. Someone can correct me, perhaps. But the Alias trilogy, the Find a Stone trilogy, which I really enjoyed, I've reviewed here, and very solid. There's a sense that, you're getting some of the kind of, these are some setting ideas I've had that could show up in a novel. The Desert Tribes and the City sections are the core of the, here's some people you could deal with. The faith stuff, it splits into the great gods, the enlightened gods, that basically the setting, the kind of mock Islam here, let's do this. And, your mileage will vary as to whether that's something you want to use, but this is just the setting. It's obviously saying, well, what if in this fantasy setting we had something that mirrored basically a cosmopolitan American's view of Islam in 1992, which I definitely found interesting as a historical experiment, thinking, what did he think was going on? For instance, the Mujahideen are still more or less American allies, at that point, post-Afghan war, during the Cold War. So there's a very different cultural context, which means that some of it will seem perhaps patronizing, or some people might consider it Orientalist. On the other hand, some people might think, wow, what on earth, this is a kind of weird attitude to take to this. This is illiberal almost to think. I'm not commenting on that. I'm just saying it is a weird historical document for that. I think anyone reading it is going to find something there. But yes, the biggest thing to take away from the setting is, and this is a legend told, The Maiden of Beauty and Legends and Tales of Saqqara, that the lawgiver was a woman who, via her intelligence and her reliance on fate, the great semi-impersonal force that really everyone recognises, not as the highest god, but as the highest thing, she manages to finagle the genies stop bothering humans as much and actually come to help humans, and she lays down a law and LORE, and she's the lawgiver, and then the first caliph is the guy who finds these many years later, and his descendants rule, particularly Hazuz, which is obviously a Mecca-like place, mosques face towards it, for instance. And so he's a Muhammad-like figure. It's an odd one because you have two Muhammad, inverted commas, like figures. Take that as you will. You know, it gives a different flavour to this, and I think the way in which religion is dealt with is sometimes interesting. I think there's a genuine attempt to, in terms of looking at the gods, you've got the great gods, the enlightened gods of enlightened civilised people who follow mock Islam, local gods who are, in some cases, not recognised, but in some cases are recognised, but are very much junior. In one section, in one region in the pantheon, only some of these gods, even if the great gods, are recognised. And the savage gods are outland gods who aren't recognised at all. They're not accepted at all. And so, yeah, you get there's some interesting stuff there, thinking about, oh, okay, so the gods are... One thing is no NPC is given an alignment through the books. And I think with the great gods, you have a similar thing where you're like, oh, none of these gods are aligned. They simply are. Fate simply is. There's similar things where, and I mentioned this in the Arabian Adventures rulebook discussion, that Grubb is very interested in collapsing D&D tropes around, particularly actually species, race, whatever you want to call it, and somewhat gender. He deals with gender interestingly, but there's stuff like, there's like a gnoll courtier in one place, there's I think a goblin courtier in another, and these are just good people basically. So this is something where this is a lot closer to a modern, call it 5th edition sensibility on monstrous races, on humanoids and stuff. But yeah, so there are some kind of interesting bits in there, but again, I'd say, you know, that's 13 pages of gods and faith stuff, which is going to come up marginally in play. So the core of this, and I'd say similarly, the Legends and Tales of Saqqara are fun. I'm not against any in-game fiction in books. I think a small amount can be fun, and it's useful sometimes to have something to tell players when you're weaponizing it in a plot, in the plot of a dungeon. They're finding out about the first caliph. You have a story for them. That's fine. But yeah, you know, in general, I'd say that stuff's kind of by the by. The core of it is the Desert Tribes chapter and the 5 Cities chapters. And these are all ones which are set up basically to tell you what is going on in the city, who is in charge, major people, major places, population, army, and tensions. And so they're meant to set up you as the DM using it, and players who are presumably allowed to read this. The way this is set up doesn't quite make sense, but the split doesn't always make sense, I mean. But the idea that they read it and they're like, this is some stuff I could do. So you've got Halwa, City of Solitude. You have the ruler, the well-meaning but cloistered, insulated ruler. And you do get some odd stuff pretty regularly. This is literally the random example I've more or less opened to, but talking about his 3 daughters. While the Caliph appears to care for them, the depth of his devotion has never been tested. I guess you could come up with a way to test it, be like, okay, if you want there to be a plot hook here, just put the plot hook here, right? You get a court with the vizier and a dhow who hangs out with him. You get a population amount. You get features, which is the kinds of things that go on with, you know, like in Halwa. You have the armed forces, 3,000 city guard, 500 palace guard, 1,000 mercenary cavalry, and 200 personal guard, and that's the vizier has that. Plus you can also get 200 Jan, who are incarnated mixed element genies, who originate with the setting, I think, here. So you're like, okay, so that's good. Others will have Mamluk societies. Others will have, you know, you'll get stuff about navies if they are significantly on the water. List of mosques. You get rumours and lore. So you hear about Zarad and the fact he is all over the place doing stuff. He's a bit ruthless. He wants to marry the Caliseldra's daughter. These are the rumours you're getting. You do get level information here. This is one of the things I mean about this being... This is really DM stuff, and I don't think the player should read any of it because of this kind of stuff. But you know that Zarad is a 15th level Shire. So, but anyway, you get a plot point there, and by plot I mean in the sense of you could make an adventure out of it. It's just a piece of information, but you could make an adventure. but there's no immediate weaponization in here, and that's the same with all this stuff. There are some pretty good little setups and pieces of information. Jesus and Hiyar, which are the biggest cities, or two of the three biggest cities, I think. Jesus is the capital as well. They get more information with more stuff about their industry and so on, more stuff about places you can go. In Jesus, you get several more members of the court as well as the Grand Caliph. You get the Vizier, you get the Grand Caliph's most valued wife, you get a noble married, you get two uncles of the Great Caliph, and you have a couple of the soldiers. You've got the keeper of the mosques. You've got all these. So because it's a more important place, it's 800,000 permanent residents, can sell up to 1.5 million during high holidays. You know, you get lots more on that, and that's useful, having all these tensions. However, this does point you towards, and the DM's guide, this is actually what I was going to say about the DM's guide. The DM's guide does the same. Everything points you towards court intrigues. Grubb seems to think that the setting significantly exists for player characters to get involved in court intrigues. But what are they doing at second level? You know, you're creating first level characters or third level. They're not immediately doing that. They're going out, presumably adventuring as you'd expect. There's no Night Below-esque gold for XP expectation here. So if you don't use that optional rule from the second edition rulebooks from the DMG, then I use that. I mean, I use several kind of first edition equivalents and so on in my game. But if you don't use that second edition optional rule that is very poorly supported, then you're going to have to come up with stories and plots. But at second level, they're not fighting Marids. So what are they doing? At fourth level, they're not doing that. What are they doing? And this book just doesn't really answer that. And this is, if you like, the single biggest problem is there's all this information which goes on for pages at a time, and you're getting a couple of paragraphs on the public gardens in Jesus and how in times of celebration they spray coloured water instead of water, sometimes even fire, steam or rainbow coloured sand. That's a nice vignette. I'm not saying you can't have any of that, but there's pages of this stuff, and the army stuff is useful, but you don't have it in any of the products here used for battle system. For Mazdaka, you get battle system scenarios. So I think in 2 Mazdaka books actually there's battle system rules scenarios, but it's not utilised for that. So what's the point really? Given that you're not going to use it for a whole set part of the life cycle, and as with this one, I should say, does not credit any playtesting. I think there were possibly some implied playtesters on the main rulebook, so I don't want to say, oh no, none of this was ever playtested. But here we have, apart from all the people doing specific jobs for the book, you also have David C. Sutherland shaping the land of Zakara. He also does the cartography. This is some of the last maps of his I think are actually any good. Dorry Wattrey for editing chapter 4, and a long list of other people, including Tim Beach and Slade Henson for proofreading and production, and then David Hirsch for his assistance with Arabic. There we go. You know, how far this was used in a game, I don't know, and I don't know how you would turn it into a first level or third level to 15th level, whatever it is, game. I don't see that here. You occasionally get mentions, I should say, you're like, oh, this place has an undercity. You don't get any details about that undercity. The actual setting, I should say, I like the different regions. I think they work. There was a good vibe to them. There was a sense you can make this work. The desert tribes and their different kind of styles and interests, including some of them being even Jan tribes, like half genies, if you like. That's good. The cities of the heart are these very big, busy cities at the centre of the politics and the industry. The cities of the north are a bit less closely associated with Jesus, all the way up to one of them being, so Hawa, City of Chaos, being the main location in the Corsair domains, which is a kind of, you know, essentially independent pirate area. And they've got kind of different vibe to them, certainly to the cities of the Pantheon, which is, they are, in Zakaran religious terms, they're all moralists, because there's moralists, etheists and pragmatists. I talked about in the last video briefly, but they're very strict, and Grubb does talk here about, well, here gender really matters a lot more, and everyone wears much more covering, and women wear the niqab or whatever. Like there's the sense that this is niqab, sorry, the sense that this is a very different religiously conservative place, but that's not completely terrible and evil. It's very restrictive and could be tough for player characters, but like there might be some value here or here. It's very like there's an attempt to be subtle. Of course, that fits into a novelistic concept better sometimes than it does into by that all that detail than into a D&D context. The cities, the ancients, this sort of wild westy or sort of heart of dark continent stuff. We're exploring ruined cities and civilizations, new cities built on old, not completely, maybe magically disturbed or weird or full of mysteries, hinterlands. That's what Ruined Kingdoms, the adventure / box set is about. You have Cities of the Pearl. One of those has more detail in Golden Voyages. Cities of the North comes up in Corsair Domains, and I think possibly in Caravans, maybe. Cities of Bone covers another city, I forget which, and Corsairs of the Great Sea covers more of the cities of the North. So there are, there's more coverage on some of these, and Hazuz gets a lot of detail in its own City of Delights, in its own box set. So that's kind of the general overview on that I'd give, is that you're getting a couple of decent plot hooks out of stuff, but there's no compared to, say, From the Ashes or City of Greyhawk by Carl Sargent, both of which have lots of little adventure cards, some of which are quite good adventures, actually, small adventures. Some are not so good, but there are lots of those in card stock like that. You don't get the mini dungeons like you do in Myth Draenor by Ed Greenwood. You just get a lot of potential things you could develop, and I ultimately don't spend money really for that. In the DM, but there's a start there. There's an interesting setting which I don't need 128 pages on. Just turning to the DM's guide then. This is a bit more interesting in some ways. I've already mentioned some of the problems. High-level characters, there are movement rules. Movement rules are helpful. Jeff Grubb is serious about providing rules for the things he writes. It's useful to contrast it perhaps to the more and more impressionistic stuff you get in even other second edition products. Some Planescape stuff is actually good for this. Some of it you're like, oh wow, you've got rules for how all this stuff will work, how it works on Limbo, and then something else just is like, oh, just make it up, sometimes in the same book. Jeff Grubb is pretty serious about that. I praise that in Spelljammer, I praise that here. You can, especially because you've got the variable scale reader for the maps, you can pretty precisely find out travel distances, and the more your group is into that, the better. You can do that. I tend to be happy with hex movement rates, which is more abstract, obviously. High-level characters is just that different classes have different rules and and some of them, it's, I think, like Rangers do get followers, Paladins do not. But everyone basically, there are a full set of replacement tables basically for the PHB. For the compared to the first edition PHB, basically. So this is that you get followers when you reach 9th level or whatever it is, and some of these are pretty generic, but some of them are pretty good actually. Like Men at Arms, all 0 level, you might get 120 infantry dressed in chain with certain things. Morale 11, 90 infantry dressed in lamella with certain things. Morale 12, etc. You could have the personal guard, could be some Mamluks, it could be desert tribesmen, it could be mercenary barbarians, it could be a DM option such as hippogriff riders. So this is very much parallel to other tables like this, but it's fun. The Rangers followers, you have more cats, you have different kind, localized clerics and bards and so on. You have you could get a rock, or a hippogriff, or a talking owl, or an elephant. That's fun. So yeah, I approve of this. This is good. There's no domain rules, obviously, and in some cases the domain side of what a PC class would do is removed, like it's just stripped back. But that's kind of, I mean, it's an AD&D thing and it's something you see throughout the life cycle of D&D, much like with mass combat. The two areas which are least fully formalised by Gary Gygax in first edition, if you want to put it that way. Obviously, even there you have Chainmail to Battle system. Those are both systems he publishes for, albeit I don't think he doesn't write Battle System first edition, does he? But they're both ones he publishes for games he's made. But those things which he least defines tend to be later on the things that get iterated again and again in completely new ways. Whereas through the first, 22 years, you get basically roughly the same core set of systems heavily iterated into AD&D between OD&D, AD&D, AD&D 2. It's only the player's option stuff, kind of the Proto 2.5, Proto 3rd edition, which radically changes the assumptions about how classes and characters work. Whereas domains, you have the very bare description, including kind of population and tax base and stuff like that in the 1E DMG. You get the castle guide for building strongholds for 2nd edition. You get which is a much fuller system than the partial system in the 1 DMG. You get the completely different birthright domain system, which also includes all these domain actions. There's lots of things like that, so it's not surprising that here you get a thing which is like, oh well, personalized, localized to the setting is the fact that this class has to go and do this. One thing, they don't get a domain, they do this instead. The one caveat is possibly, I think, and it's, I think I'm thinking for priests maybe, is that you get the surprising decision to say, well, basically a successful high-level priest just gets forced to do stuff for everyone else and can't adventure very much, because that's to undermine the basis of the game. Of course, the high-level character adventures less for various reasons, and saying duties are one of them is fine, but I think you don't want to actively put an obstacle in the way of players playing the game. Again, is that something that ever happened in Jeff Grubb's game? I don't know. Ignore the lore. There is a mini-game system for... I won't ignore it. I'll say there's a mini-game system for determining whether you are, as someone who's accused, not necessarily you, is found guilty of the two categories of illegal act, forbidden and discouraged, and a bunch of modifiers for whether people are local and whether there's evidence and so on. And genies can't bear witness, which is something you could definitely make a very good plot out of. I don't know if any of the adventures do that. They can't kind of offer witness in court. And that's fine. I don't mind having an extra system if you want to use it. It reminds me of, it's the kind of thing you'll be like, oh, that was in Wilderlands or CSIO or something, or that was it. There's that one thing in Echoes from Fomalhaut. It has a very 70s to early 80s kind of vibe. It does say, however, you should really roleplay all this out. This is a classic. You get this even in some first edition products, but you especially get it by second edition. The idea that, and remember, this comes out after Chicago by Night. So, as an example, Hazu's City of Delights comes out after Chicago by Night has, and this, in terms of what it thinks is interesting, comes out after Vampire has already become the hot new thing. And so the idea that, yes, of course you should re-role play out the court scene. I can't imagine anything worse than spending a lot of time in a session, like pretending to be lawyers when none of us are. Yeah, have your contributions, but see it. I think it's still good to see it as part of the game, and that there are mechanics for resolving it once you've made your strategy. Power Groups just gives a list of the different Mamluk organisations, including lots of face paint patterns for Mamluks. You can see the patterns there. Holy Slayer fellowships. Mamluks, by the way, are like slave corporations, self-sustaining slave corporations, who are actually in significant positions of authority in the north, and who are technically all owned by the Grand Caliph, and who are in lots and lots of cities and are part of the kind of security force. There's Holy Slayers, who are assassins groups. most of which are not hireable, most of which have a particular, like, you are the enemies of, we're a secret cult, we fight for our god, or the friendly word, which is all about, destroying reputations rather than killing people. They have stuff for creating new groups. But this is something that immediately makes me think of the some of the great sections in Star Wars D6 products, which is like, hey, you want to do this? These are the ways that could happen, and these are the kinds of things that you could do. And here's some plot hooks. And I think there's a bit less than that, but it's okay. Mystic groups are just more fringe religious groups. Elemental brotherhoods, though there is only one major one, the evil Brotherhood of the True Flame. Again, it just says, well, there might be another one theoretically. You get a bunch of NPCs for the Brotherhood of the True Flame. Again, here, this is interesting that this is in the DM book. Why the split, if you're finding out all the details about virtually every other character. I think there's one instance in the city details where it says, this character is not mentioned in the other book because he's not known about very widely. And you're like, okay. But all the stats, the level stats, and indeed the fact that this person is actually quite good-hearted or actually evil, because again, it just says that sometimes in the player book. Yeah. So Secrets of Zakara, alphabetical order of the cities with stuff. In Afyar, for instance, it is the Padishah is mad, but you can probably just ignore him. Try to stay away from him. He wants his crown prince back. There's some options for the crown prince. He's alive and marooned on some island of the crowded sea. He's alive and enslaved by raiders from Narg and is toiling in Talab. He is dead, and his body has become an undead creature haunting the ruined cities for his murderer. He is dead, slain by his genie double, who wishes to take the crown prince's place in the court of the Padishah. Lastly, he's alive, but in hiding from a group of holy slayers. Finally, and then there's a mystery to do with the Lost One, an unenlightened if kindly god who has dissipated his psyche, his power, into all the elephants of the island. So those are two really interesting things. This is the thing I want to say, is not that everything here is awful, like, oh, it's just all boring, but that all this stuff about the Crown Prince, you could get a low-level group involved, but there's no suggestion how. The way you do it, I guess, is by dropping them hooks about, like, leads that might end up with information. It's something where you're going to have to start plotting them in to do it in a way that is quite inorganic and certainly it pushes towards a more linear trad game. You do this, then you do this mission, then you do this. It's really, especially because it relies on getting more and more involved in court politics as it goes on. Even though you could get it going at a low level, it's going to become more important at mid to high levels. And the elephant thing is great, but there's no plot hook from it. It's just a mystery you could find out. So again, there's no gamification of that material to say, oh, do it this way, or this is the setup. I like, I don't mind being told what the official story is, but I like the fact that, like, oh, you could do any of these things for this plot hook. Dailies, it's got a subtle magical aura around the whole thing, and what you find out is that this is because the former inhabitants had a guardian, a huge earth monolith of double hit dice and damage. It's dead though, so don't worry, don't need to know about that. And the Ministry of Secrets has lots of information, but they're not there to distribute the information, they are there to keep it. So there's nothing useful about that city, really. Hafaya, the Knoll scribe Jamalia, has accidentally meant the crown prince, it wants to become a desert rider. The prince, might run off to join the desert nomads and must be rescued before it's too late. There's sort of a gamification of he disappears and they get some adventures, but you could go for the classic, they don't want anyone to know. Or it needs to be secret. I did that with Gaius on my my Spelljammer group, and that was a fairly directed adventure. But it's also something you don't want that to be the way that every adventure happens, is some high level people force you to do some stuff, and they weren't forced in that case, they accepted a job, but like you're forced to do stuff and there's an excuse for why they're not hiring the 7th level characters. Hawa has very little ironically, Hawa has a short paragraph, and it's one of the more useful ones. The rise of Istishia cultists has been reflected in a number of disappearances, particularly among young people. Grima, the local priest of Kor, is incensed by the tragedy and greatly rewards any who can solve the disappearances and remove the cult. If you had a long list of hooks like that, even if they weren't detailed, it'd be like a gazetteer for Wildlands or Aurelion in Echoes from Fomalhaut, and it would be much less objectionable. It's immediately usable. It's something which is not, doesn't rely on you being involved in the court, basically. The magical items, a lot of these are localizations of normal magic items, or slight twists. Mace +1/+2 versus undead, and mace +2/+4 versus undead. And that affects great ghouls as well as other undead. Dagger of Quickness, Cutlass of the Golden Gulf. It's a combat bonus, which you generate on the tables, but it also is water breathing. Spear of Accuracy, +1 to hit, +3 when thrown. Swords that hurt genies. The Tortoise Shield, which is a buckler, which has the same protection as a tower shield. That's a really cool item. Oil of Obedience, someone who's sleeping can be turned into essentially a zombie for a day or something. Oil of Attractiveness, which makes you very attractive, but if you don't remove it in time, becomes Oil of Horribleness. Different kinds of cursed scrolls. Potential. It says new kinds of potential curses on a scroll. That's good. Grants, which are like maps, they're non-magical, but they give you like, you can go and take this land, or if you hand this in, you can have this amount of money. And yeah, a little message rings, staff of the different elements. Yeah, Candle of Evocation, which is just more specific. So it's an adaptation, but it's more specific. It has to be for one god rather than for an alignment. Different types of genie prisons with different conditions of a genie you might find in it. That's already in a genie prison. So it might be they have to do 3 tasks. It might be they serve you for 1001 days. It might be they've gone insane. It might be that they are just allowed to go off and leave you. You've released them, so they go and fulfill their job, which is to find an item. So yeah, it's got much more useful stuff in it. It's got follower tables. It has some even decent magic items. It has a couple of decent hooks. It doesn't have anything that you can just knock out quickly. It's not something. That's one thing, is there's no adventure in here, and I can live with that, except that so much the space giving me hooks doesn't give me hooks I can use. You have 4 cards, is it 5 cards maybe? 4 cards about Hazuz and its major locations. There's a separate box set, so in a sense that feels less worthwhile, but it's it's also a lot of it you're not going to use generic information about the location of the Golden Mosque, so it seems like a waste. However, then we get, I think 5 cards, is it? 5 cards of generic location maps with keys. So that is a city caravanserai, including a sample one with information about a couple of sample ones on the back. You have a Zakaran market, like the different parts around the centre, around the kind of central souk. You have the Tower House, very common in cities, with a key, and then on the back, it will say who might be in what room. You have a couple of types of houses: small domed house, small courtyard house, and a large courtyard house on the back. And you have that's an oasis map, like an oasis settlement, and on the back you have a rural caravanserai, bathhouse and mosque as they might appear in that small rural settlement. Now that's incredibly useful. That is more useful than lots of, basically you go to an entire other box set and you don't find anything as useful as that. Just stuff you can crack out regularly, gives you maps. This reminds me of, I actually think I have it to hand somewhere nearby, what I recently reviewed, Lankmar City of Adventure, and the geomorphs and generic building maps that were provided with it. You're like, this is really useful for me to actually use. There's then 3 slightly more wasteful ones: characters in costume, Albardian possessions, so desert people possessions, and desert people tents, which have some things, again, you might be like, it could be useful to think, what do these people carry? But it's very rarely going to come up. Finally, Monstrous Compendium. This is again a useful thing. Some of it you have versions of the noble versions of genies in the Al-Qadim Monstrous Compendium Appendix. That is distinct from this, and you'd have to go and buy it to get that. You also obviously have some noble genie or Tao or whatever information in the normal Monstrous Compendium Volume 2, so what's based in the Monstrous Manual. The core two are number MC1 and 2. And I guess there's detail here about how they deal with people in the Land of Fate, their relations amongst themselves. Tao, it's not Tao, sorry, it is Efreet, are weirdly turned neutral, though their rulers are still lawful evil, we are told. We get stuff about, you know, where they live, their locale, their powers. Jani are the new minor genie, so they, or relatively minor, they start at 6+2 hit dice, which compared to Jinni, who are the next weakest, are 7+3 if they're non-noble. Tao are 8+3. Efreeti are 10, and married are 13. Non-nobles in all cases. So the Jani go from 6+3 up to 6+2 up to 9, and there are two types of 8 hit dice Jani, and they tend good. They form kind of civilized. They live on the prime. They are genie folk basically. They are actually more like Ganassi or something. Gen or Gen are a different thing again that Shairs use. I talked about that in the previous video on the rulebook. So yeah, that's useful stuff. It's not like there's adventurable stuff directly from it, other than they live in this kind of place, and the stuff you get in any Monstrous Compendium. But more, you know, it's not unhelpful to have more ideas. I guess you could say the 4 normal genies don't necessarily need replicating. Island Giant is weird evil giants who live on islands, but only the female reproduces by polymorphing, using shape change and breeding with other people. And yeah, which is weird and fun. The Ogre Giant is quite interesting. They are ogre kind. They're 20 feet tall, but they are ogre kind. They're chaotic neutral, and they don't eat sentient flesh, so you have a really quite good, not encounter, I'd say you can push it further than an encounter, an entire experience where your players, you know, hear about ogres up in the mountains doing bad things, or they are, you know, out on some islands and they see some 20-foot tall monsters, you know, who are apparently burying corpses under cairns, but actually the point is you're not meant to disturb those cairns. There are burial rites involved. You can see a interesting set of possibilities, and I don't expect the compendium entry to give me the adventure itself. I expect it to give me ideas, and that did. 2 pages on the Zakaran Rock. I guess the common rock, which is detailed here as well, I think is in the Monstrous Compendium. You get a great rock who's 270 foot long wingspan, 120 feet long, 2-headed rock who can bite twice. You get a few rules for that. Some stuff about the fact that the great rock and the 2-headed rock are intelligent, so you can talk to them, but you know how useful it is to negotiate. One interesting thing, actually, sorry, I should say, with the genies is you get stuff about how they deal with captivity, Shairs, and service and wishes as a subset of service, and that's quite helpful. That is going to come up more here than elsewhere in terms of the specifics of Shair summoning them. Finally, you get Yakmen, Yakaria. These guys are weird. This is not a bad place to start or end on in terms of the slightly weird nature of this product sometimes. Is that these are Yakmen. They're mentioned elsewhere, but the thing is they have essentially a power over the Tao due to some experience of their god, the lost god, over the Tao and over the Khan of the Tao. And that means they can command service from the Tao. And they try not to abuse that too much, but the Tao also can't actively try to oppose them. They can't actively pervert the desires of the Yakmen in the way they might try to with other people. And they live up on the mountains in the northeast of Zakara, and they are starting to spy on Zakara, so they are the meta threat. And I'm not against that. I think it's just odd in the same way that you kind of like, oh, this is a setting about being like Sinbad or Aladdin. Most of the detail is about Prince Ali rather than about Aladdin, the beggar thief boy. In the same way, there's a thing. Oh, by the way, you know, we've got to get down to business before the Huns arrive. But it doesn't come up ever in any other place in the book. It's mentioned once or twice, basically, over the whole of this plus the Arabian Adventures rulebook. So there is a sense then that, you know, you've got a bunch of good ideas, you've got some very useful elements. The monsters, the new monsters particularly, good, glad for them. Magic items, there's some good ones in there that feel very thematic, and there's some useful reskins and stuff which saves you doing it. You know, it's not the hardest thing. It's nice to have the Arabian Nights Legends. There's a really interesting setting. The actual cities sound interesting. But the amount of gameable material coming out of this box set compared to, and this is the relevant thing, compared to the first or second edition Forgotten Realms box sets, compared to the Greyhawk box set, compared to basically anything, the Carl Sergeant Greyhawk box sets I've mentioned, even Maztica, the Maztica box set, which is not amazing, is comparable in that sense to the Spelljammer box set, except that was also the rule set, so you had much more concentration. In this case, you're buying this after you've bought the rule book, so you're just buying a subpar setting box. It's not dreadful, it's not completely worthless. There are things I've said that you can take out of it. It's, you know, it's useful if nothing else that when you are developing your campaign, if you don't have more detail on the city you want, it's not a bad place to get a decent outline of that. And you're going to use the extra bonus stuff as well. You might find a couple of hooks that are useful and you can develop yourself. It is very much like a C tier, you know, thing in terms of what you're going to get for Al-Qadim, though, even though it seems so core. Anyway, if you've read it or run Al-Qadim, I'd love to hear more about it in the comments, and I'll see you next time.